Which live-action Spider-Man is actually the strongest? Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or Tom Holland? If you think the answer is obvious, your brain is lying to you. We are hardwired to associate screaming muscles, ripped suits, and dramatic effort with maximum power, meaning the most famous, jaw-dropping show of strength in Spider-Man history is actually a massive physical illusion. Meanwhile, the single biggest mind-boggling display of raw physical force in live-action superhero history didn't happen in a massive movie climax. It happened in a background sequence most fans completely ignore. Today we're putting all three Spider-Men under a huge physics microscope. We're tossing out the cinematic hype, applying real-world classical mechanics and materials science, and calculating the exact forces in newtons to settle who reigns supreme once and for all. So let's look at the math. Let's start with the gold standard of cinematic superhero feats: Tobey Maguire stopping the runaway subway train in Spider-Man 2. For over 2 decades, this has been the benchmark of superhuman power. To understand how much force Tobey's body actually endured, we have to look at the mechanical specifications of the runaway transit train. In this sequence, Peter's body acts as the single literal tension node, bridging the runaway train to the surrounding buildings. To get the most accurate scientific breakdown, we can look at 2 different physical models. This first model uses the exact specifications of the Chicago Transit Authority 2200 series railcars visible on screen. The second model uses a 4-car R160 New York City transit train, which was analyzed in a famous published paper by physics students at the University of Leicester. Let's look at the math for the first model. The CTA cars have an empty mass of 129,000 kilograms. Factoring in a crowded passenger load of about 120 passengers, the total moving mass is roughly 137,000 kilograms. The train is traveling at a speed of 80 miles per hour, which translates to 35 meters per second. From the moment Peter anchors his webs until the train finally stops, it takes nearly 50 seconds to bleed off all that kinetic energy. Using the impulse momentum formula, the deceleration force is modeled as this, and this yields a deceleration force of 97,818 newtons. But we can't forget that the train's electric motors are still running at peak output throughout this entire sequence. The driving traction force generated by the train's powered bogies is modeled as this. Using a motor acceleration rate of 1.74 meters per second squared, the traction force pushing against Peter is 238,116.78 newtons. To find the total tensile force sustained by Peter's body, we add these together. This equals 335,934.78 newtons of force. That's equivalent to about 34.24 metric tons of continuous pull force. Now for the second model, the University of Leicester model with the R160 cars, the mass is higher at 200,000 kilograms, but the speed is lower at 55 miles per hour. Under these parameters, the total force required to stop the train is calculated at 298,400 newtons, which is about 30.42 metric tons. Regardless of which model we use, Tobey's body was holding back over 30 tons of continuous force. But here is the critical physical detail. That force is divided across both of his outstretched arms. This means his shoulders, joints, and pectoral muscles had to sustain upwards of 167,967 newtons of tension force per arm. In a normal human biological frame, applying a tensile force of just 3,300 to 4,000 newtons carries a 25% probability of breaking a bone, while a force of 13,200 to 16,000 newtons guarantees complete structural skeletal failure. For Tobey to hold over 335,000 newtons without his arms being ripped clean off his torso proves his cellular and structural tissues are more than 20 times stronger than an ordinary human. Stopping the train is an enormous feat. But what about Tobey's raw, static, isometric strength? His ability to hold a massive load in place without moving. We see a perfect baseline for this in the first movie, where Tobey holds up a loaded Roosevelt Island tramway cabin filled with children using just a single arm. Under load, this cabin weighs approximately 5,900 kilograms. The downward static force of gravity acting on the cabin is modeled by this. Multiplying 5,900 kilograms by the acceleration of gravity, we get roughly 57,879 newtons of force. That is a static single arm holding capacity of 5.9 metric tons. He stands on a small structural ledge, maintaining this force with zero visible signs of skeletal deformation. Have you ever tried to map out your family history on a piece of paper or in a generic Word document? You start with your grandparents, add a few aunts, uncles, and cousins, and before you know it, you're looking at a messy, confusing web of crisscross lines that nobody else can read. Whether you're prepping for a big family reunion, working on a school history project, or trying to preserve your family's records before they're lost to time, documenting your ancestry shouldn't feel like an impossible puzzle. That's exactly where Wondershare eDraw Max comes in. eDraw Max is an incredibly user-friendly, all-in-one diagram software that completely removes the guesswork from creating a family tree. Instead of starting from scratch, you can jump right into their organization chart category and choose from thousands of built-in family tree templates to get a clean layout on your canvas instantly. What makes eDraw Max such a game changer for genealogy enthusiasts, students, and educators is its specialized toolkit. You can easily drag and drop dedicated family tree symbols like male and female ancestor shapes, photo containers, and smart relationship connectors right onto your chart. If you have a massive amount of data, you don't have to type it all out manually. eDraw Max features a powerful Excel file import tool, allowing you to load a prepared Excel file to generate a personalized set of custom symbol libraries in a single click. From there, the professional symbol settings give you total control over your design. You can enable the name display when previewing your symbols and use the fixed size setting to make sure every single family member box stays perfectly standardized and uniform. Once you quickly drop in your family names, birth and death dates, and member photos, your custom symbol library can be exported and saved for any future family history documents. The end result is a polished, presentation-ready pedigree chart that looks like it was made by a professional designer. When you're done, eDrawMex lets you export your ancestry diagram as a PDF, PNG, or Word document, making it incredibly easy to print out for relatives or share digitally. You don't need any design experience to map out a beautiful family history chart. Work smart with eDrawMex and see how easy it is to draw a family tree today. Click the link at the very top of the description box below to try Wondershare eDrawMex for free. Now let's talk about the middle child of the Spider-Man franchises, Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man from Earth 120703. In power scaling discussions, Andrew's often left to the side. Fans assume he simply doesn't have the heavy-duty strength feats to compete with Tobey or Tom, but Andrew's physical design is actually optimized for a completely different mechanical profile. He's faster and he has quicker reflexes. But his most significant show of raw physical strength occurs in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where he catches a falling Crown Vic police cruiser directly on his shoulders. If you just look at the static weight of a police car, it's about 1,950 kilograms. That sounds relatively minor compared to a train, but the danger in catching a falling object is the massive spike in force caused by the sudden deceleration. Let's look at the math. The car falls in a state of gravity-assisted freefall from a height of about 2 meters. We can calculate its impact velocity using this formula. This gives us an impact velocity of approximately 6.26 meters per second. When Andrew catches the vehicle, he bends his knees, compressing his body to absorb the impact over a stopping distance of roughly 0.3 meters. This rapid compression means the vehicle is undergoing a massive deceleration rate. Plugging in the numbers, the car is decelerated at a rate of 65.4 meters per second squared. Now we can find the dynamic retarding force absorbed by Andrew's skeletal frame. This equates to 146,659 newtons of force, or approximately 14.95 metric tons. Because of the rapid deceleration, the apparent weight of the car is magnified by a factor of nearly 8. Andrew absorbs this entire compression load through his lower limbs and spine without collapsing. Andrew also demonstrates incredible dynamic utility, but in terms of raw, unassisted isometric lifting, Andrew sits at a comfortable maximum baseline of about 5 to 15 tons of force. Now let's talk about Tom Holland's Spider-Man from Earth 199999. When fans talk about Tom's strength, they always point to the Staten Island ferry scene in Spider-Man Homecoming. The ferry is sliced completely in half by a malfunctioning Chitauri weapon, and Peter attempts to hold the two separating halves together. An Andrew J. Barber class Staten Island ferry is a massive maritime vessel weighing approximately 3,200 metric tons. When split, hydrostatic pressure and a shifting center of gravity cause each 1,600 ton half to rotate outward. The center of gravity for each half acts at a distance of roughly 5.25 meters from the central axis. We can calculate the outward gravitational torque with this. This math yields a splitting torque of 82,404,000 Newton meters. To hold this massive structure together horizontally, calculations show that Peter would have to exert a continuous horizontal tension force of approximately 34 million newtons across his upper extremities. That's equivalent to holding a static tension of 3,465.85 metric tons. This sounds completely god tier, but this is where the physical illusion of cinematic strength tricks us. There's a massive difference between the system load of the vessel and the direct muscular load that Peter's arms actually sustain. Unlike Tobey Maguire, who acted as the single physical link for 100% of the train's force, Tom Holland fired hundreds of web lines across the ferry's bisection gap before jumping in. Those web lines probably did about 90% of the structural work. When the webs began snapping, the boat continued to separate. When Peter jumped in to hold the last remaining strands, he was holding standard web lines. He held it briefly, but the ship continued to separate, and he was failing before Iron Man arrived to weld it back together. The ferry scene is an unbelievable display of durability, but as a display of raw lifting strength, it's kind of an illusion. But don't write Tom Holland off yet, because his actual verified peak strength feat is 100 times more impressive, and it has absolutely zero asterisks associated with it. In Spider-Man Far From Home, during the battle in Venice, the upper portion of the campanile of the Santa Maria Formosa bell tower begins to structurally fail and tip over toward a crowded plaza. Peter fires web lines and physically holds up the collapsing masonry. Let's look at the sheer scale of the stone he's holding. The falling prism section has a dimension of 8.65 meters in width, 8.65 meters in length, and 34.6 meters in height. Built from high-density building limestone with a hollow solidity ratio of roughly 20%, the collapsing section of the tower has a total mass of approximately 1,535 metric tons. When this base sheared, the tower began to tip, translating that mass into a massive rotational torque. To prevent it from falling, Peter didn't just have to lift it, he had to pull the masonry horizontally back against the base to create enough frictional force to prevent the stone from sliding down. Forensic structural engineering models calculate that the horizontal tension force required to halt the falling tower sits between 1.96 to 9.81 times 10 to the 7th newtons. This means Tom Holland was exerting a continuous structural hold of 2,000 to 10,000 metric tons of force. And unlike the Staten Island Ferry, there's no web distribution illusion here. Peter successfully halted the descent of the tower, maintained the hold for over 30 seconds, and controlled its descent. What's even more terrifying is that after the sequence ended, he wasn't even tired or physically exhausted. He was just relieved that his gift for MJ survived the fight. This is a fully verified, self-sustained display of multi-thousand ton physical force. So when we look at the raw numbers, who actually sits at the top of the live-action Spider-Man hierarchy? In third place is Andrew Garfield. His peak output during the police car catch reached about 15 tons of dynamic force. He's easily the fastest of the three, but in a test of raw, heavy-duty lifting and holding, his biomechanics are not built for huge loads. In second place is Tobey Maguire. His legendary train stop required a maximum of about 34.24 metric tons of force, and a single-arm static hold of the cable car sits at roughly 5.9 metric tons. Tobey is an absolute tank, but his physical feats operate on a vehicular scale. In first place, by a massive, undeniable margin, is Tom Holland. Even if we completely dismiss the Staten Island Ferry scene as an illusion, his stabilization of the Venice bell tower mathematically demanded a minimum of 2,000 tons of force, scaling up to over 10,000 tons. Let's put that into perspective. The peak force Tom Holland held in Venice is roughly 292 times greater than the maximum force Tobey Maguire ever exerted to stop that runaway train. Our brains trick us into thinking Tobey is stronger because we watched him pass out, scream, and bleed to stop a train, while Tom Holland held a crumbling historical monument horizontally and walked away without even breaking a sweat. But the math doesn't lie. Tom Holland is, without a doubt, the physically strongest live-action Spider-Man. But what did you think? Did the math surprise you? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.